The filibuster has gotten into the news lately. There's some suggestions from the executive branch that we should get rid of it forever. And then we hear some talks of zombie filibusters and talking filibusters and whether they should be invoked or not. And so, tell you a little bit about filibuster so you could make a better idea or have a better idea what's going on with it. So, in short, what a filibuster is, it's a method to defeat passage of law by essentially talking it to run out the clock or test the resolve of the other lawmakers. It's like, how bad do you want this? Do you want to sit there for days listening to this? Are there more important things we should be doing? That kind of thing. It's basically to get it's essentially for the minority party to be able to assert themselves on certain issues. So, what is the historical uh, view on this? Well, almost every lawmaking body has had some form of it, but the name is not as it's not as historic. It doesn't go deep back into history like many of these other sources. In fact, the U.S. didn't use this term initially either, which I'll talk about. So, for example, um, Cato, famous senator of Rome, trying to keep the republic in play. One of the things he would famously do is do these incredibly long speeches. Historically, we know him as this incredibly capable speaker. And what he would do is because the Senate was required to shut down at sunset, so his what he would do is he'd literally talk out the clock as they understood it back then. And pretty much all parliaments have had some variant of this, but we'll get into how sometimes it gets locked down over time. So, in terms of the U.S. Congress and its usage, first, it's not a constitutional item. There's nothing in the Constitution about a filibuster or nothing to do with how things are debated within the House or the Senate. In fact, the Constitution leads those rules entirely up to the House and Senate themselves, so they can set it up pretty much any way they want. So the only place we have the filibuster is in the Senate. The House doesn't have one. The House did have some form of unlimited debate up and through 1842, and they changed the rules to prevent this. They basically limited the amount of speeches people could give before a vote had to be forced through. In fact, the Senate itself didn't have any rule at all when it was first formed that allowed people to do this talking out the clock thing. It only became possible in 1805 because of a rule change. And oddly, even though it existed, it wouldn't be used actually until 1837. And again, the filibuster, the term is not in the rules itself. It's a name that was adopted later down the line. So it's just basically rules on debate. How long can someone speak on something, and how many times can they speak on something, and when can they speak? Like during the initiation of the law, during the amendments, calling questions, all that kind of stuff. So apparently, what we understand where the term came from was in 1853 time frame. If I get this right, the Spanish word filibustero. And my Spanish speaking listeners, which I know there's a couple, you could rip me on that if I tore that up. Filibustero. Let's try one more. Filibustero. Okay. Anyways, the term was used kind of interchangeably as a pirate. It may have its root. It doesn't translate exactly the way it sounds, but it may have been borrowed from a Dutch word earlier for freebooter, but it doesn't translate into that. I looked it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm horrible with languages. But anyways, so filibustero. So essentially at that time frame in the 1850s, there were a lot of adventurers, Americans and other sorts, who would go into South American countries and the islands of the Caribbean and either knock down governments or do other kinds of kind of merc type stuff. And the filibusteros were people who, again, the background is pirate, but also they were people who just kind of stole and wrecked things. And so, coming into English, we pronounced it filibuster. If you look at it, it says that except for the O on the end. So filibuster was just the anglicizing of that word. Probably whoever saw it never heard it pronounced and just saw it written. And at the time, it was being heavily debated whether Cuba should be brought into the United States. However, it was still a Spanish possession at the time, and a particular senator said, uh, if at some point Cuba peacefully can come into our midst, that would be a great thing to debate about. But at the time, we should not be filibustering Cuba. So basically, we didn't want to steal it. So it sounds like what happened is the word got picked up, people liked it, and then they used the term filibuster for people who were stealing time by using debate or possibly stealing the ability of other people to speak. So essentially, the way the filibuster was written is the Senate could essentially talk until an item was tabled. So basically, you just keep going and going and going. And if the other side caved in, they would just table it, maybe get back to it later or never. However, also, what would happen is if the other side was incapable of continuing to speak, or if quorum uh, rules failed, then it could potentially be brought to a vote. It was rarely invoked during the 1800s. It was considered kind of ungentlemanly. It was bad form. And so it was understood that you should only be using it when this something was really, really dear to you, something that really mattered. It shouldn't just be coming up because uh, your constituents didn't like that particular item. So one of the big changes that comes is Woodrow Wilson, my favorite guy's pictured right here. In 1917, Wilson wanted to arm merchants ahead of World War One, which would have made them combatants, would have dragged us into the war, which obviously was his goal. Um, because it was viewed that the filibuster was used to prevent this from happening. Well, anyway, so the filibuster was looked at by enough people to say, "Oh, gee, we didn't get to do what we wanted when we wanted, so we need to make this a little easier." So they adopted what was called the two-thirds cloture rule. Essentially, what it means, cloture is when you essentially force the debates to come to an end. Uh, 16 senators can initiate this, and then two-thirds have to actually adopt it. Um, the first use after that was used on the Treaty of Versailles, which our good friend Wilson here, once again, that was his baby. And essentially, the filibuster was used to prevent the United States from signing the Treaty of Versailles. It was altered again in 1949 so that cloture could be applied to any Senate business, not just the primary bill being debated. So things like amendments and rules and other things like that. In 1959, essentially, they changed the rule to two-thirds present and voting. So the idea is because they have a quorum rule, if not enough people were there, essentially you could just stop the business of the Senate. By two-thirds present and voting, not being there You basically couldn't play the trick of not showing up and forcing the vote not to happen, since they were doing it off of who was the people who were present and voting. So when things really finally got messed up, it was 1972. They created what was called the two-track system. Uh, Prior to, a filibuster shut down all business until cloture or until being tabled. This two-track system allowed other business to occur. So you could essentially, someone could say, okay, we're filibustering this, and then it would just kind of sit there while they went to other business. Whereas before, no other business could be taken care of until the filibuster was resolved one way or the other. Um, so the effect of this 1972 change, which is occasionally known as the zombie filibuster or the non-talking filibuster. Prior to 1972, there was about between 1949 and 1972, there was probably about one filibuster per year. With 1972, with the two-track system, essentially we were given an effect of continuous silent filibusters. Uh, Essentially, anybody who could just basically step up and say, we don't want to vote on this. And if you do attempt to vote on it, we'd filibuster it. And so they just say, okay, well, if you would filibuster it, we're just going to treat it as if you really are filibustering it, and we'll table it for the time being till we can get around to it. 1975, another revision, two-thirds all members, basically going away from the two-thirds all present and voting. Uh, Thus, small members can filibuster with a lack of a quorum. 2013, essentially, nominations, except for the Supreme Court, were removed from the filibuster rules. So, this is where you hear about the nuclear option, where essentially the Senate, uh, under control of the Democratic Party, uh, eliminated uh, eliminated the filibuster on nominations in order to ram lots of people through, and essentially it's been that way since. So now I'm going to bring up Chip Roy, who's been kind of front and center in the news on trying to get a talking filibuster going on the Save America Act. And I'm going to paraphrase him. So, the commonly accepted 60 vote filibuster threshold to shut off debate is not the only way to force a vote in the Senate. The majority can force opposing senators to speak under the current Senate rules if there is a quorum. The Senate must either be voting or a member must be speaking. In other words, if no one is speaking and a quorum is present, the vote on the pending business can occur. So the idea is you're going to force the opposition to talk, and you're either going to make them dig in and talk for as long as they can possibly stand it, shutting down all business, or at some point they're going to be incapable of carrying the debate forward, and essentially a vote can occur at that point, and the vote would occur as a majority vote. Now, one of the things that's been coming up lately, especially from the executive branch, is the idea of eliminating the filibuster. And so I was looking into, so what kind of effect would, let's say we never had a filibuster, what kind of effect would it have had? And most of what I can see in terms of so some bills were delayed, some bills were delayed for a long time, and some uh, no impact whatsoever. I mean, they got filibustered, but the thing got passed within like a week of the filibuster anyway, and so I'm not going to consider those. So particular acts that actually just got completely shut down. Uh, and these are interesting because they didn't get shut down permanently. They got shut down for depending varying 10 to 20 years, where they were brought up, filibustered and shut down and brought back again within the 10 to 20 years later. The first one was the Voting Rights Act of 1890. This was designed to uh, basically make it easier for black people to vote because there were a lot of issues going on in the South with the Jim Crow laws at the time. And it also would have limited the franchise of voting to U.S. citizens only, kind of ahead of its time. Another one was a series of anti lynching bills where the federal government was trying to take jurisdiction over lynching because they weren't being tried properly at the local level. And those particular bills, I said, were delayed 10 to 20 years, but then would later come back around and be passed. Now, other ones that got completely shot down and never passed. We had the cap and trade laws, which would have basically put us on the carbon tax system where uh, businesses would have had to pay and sell uh, carbon tax certificates, and basically it would have been pretty detrimental to the economy. Another one was the basically making a law version of the Dream Act, which would have allowed a lot of people in the country who are here illegally to become citizens just automatically. There was a massive gun background check expansion that was shut down. Uh, then there was the For the People Voting Act. That sounds like something. Whenever you hear something that sounds sugary like that, you know it's garbage. Essentially, this would have put redistricting control at the federal level. It would have allowed for pretty much mail-in voting across the country. It would have eased all restrictions on voting requirements, etc., etc. This is one that came in, I believe, probably 2016-ish, and the filibuster shut that down permanently. Then there was another one where they wanted to have the feds control redistricting based on race. Then there was one with the labor rights bill to strengthen the unions. Primarily, they would have the effect of making the teachers' unions and the federal workers' unions stronger. Then there was the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would have basically uh, tried to eliminate the malicious, saying that right, basically the made up gender wage gap. It would have forced companies to come up with some way of making that gap go away, even though it's a artifact of the difference between genders and not an actual pay gap that's occurring. So basically, we have the filibuster. We have on one side the executive branch saying we probably should shut it down permanently. We've got other senators saying no, 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 it's this time honored thing. We got to keep it. We have Chip Roy saying no, we can do just a real filibuster like we did in the old days, and there's nothing nothing stops us from doing this. We've got a little bit of history which shows that there was some bad things that were very much slow rolled by the filibuster, and then there were some better things that have been permanently taken off the table. So in the past, the filibuster was used to block various voting and racial reforms, and by voting specifically on racial issues, where blacks were being denied the vote, or at least being severely impeded from voting. But all these passed within 10 to 20 years. So although it was a bad thing, it wasn't something that stopped it from happening indefinitely. Now, one thing that's bad about the filibuster is senators use it as cover to avoid bills that are popular that they don't want to vote for. So their constituents want them to vote for it, and then they can go, "Oh, look, the filibuster stopped me from being able to vote. I really wanted to vote for it, guys. Sorry." So it's basically it's a fig leaf for senators that are in squishy districts. However, On the plus side, it very much has blocked some progressive stink bombs that we would have never recovered from. This would be actually a very different nation if some of those bills had made it through. The idea of a talking filibuster, I don't see any downside of it. At least nothing's been presented to me as it. So it seems to be a sane way to go on the whole SAVE Act thing. So I would say it probably makes a lot of sense to invoke a talking filibuster for this particular act and anything else that might come up that's uh, needed. So instead of allowing the Democrats to just say, "Oh, we're not going to vote on this," if they're initiating a filibuster, force them to talk through it, and could provide some interesting political theater, if nothing else. And worst case, if it's all done and it doesn't pass, we're no worse off than we were before. And I would definitely disagree with the idea at this time of getting rid of the filibuster altogether. All right, comment section below. Did you know about the filibuster before this? Did this help you out learning anything? Is there something I missed? If there's something you thought I didn't cover right, go ahead and let me know in the comments. We can work it out down there. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm's brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, look at my other titles. I get into lots of different things. You'll find something you like, you should subscribe. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.